Hey everybody, this is Miss Curry, and I'm going to be helping you with understanding acids and bases today. But first, I'd like to show you a little warm-up. So with this warm-up, it's just a little reminder. The questions and answers are together, so there's no mystery. But we're going to be talking about the diffusion of water across the cell membrane. We've got to remind ourselves that it's called osmosis, and remind ourselves that the gel-like substance inside a cell that contains the nucleus and other organelles is called cytoplasm. So don't forget that, because it's from way back in August. Okay, so for the lab tomorrow, you have to know certain information. And the thing that we're going to need to understand is right here on the screen. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to answer these questions. You should be able to tell me if an acid tastes sour or bitter, if a base tastes sour or bitter, what the pH range is there's actually a range, kind of like a number line that I'm going to show you, and what the range is that makes something count as acidic or an acid, and what range of numbers goes with basic. And we're going to look at an example of a neutral substance and why pH is important. So keep these in mind. This is what you need to know by the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's talk about why pH is important. So pH is what is a measurement that we're using to see if something is an acid or a base, or acidic and basic is another way you might hear about it. Now, first of all, it's important because it keeps our systems of our body balanced with acids and bases. So too much acid, for example, would give you heartburn or a tummy ache, where the acid inside your stomach actually goes up into the esophagus and starts to hurt. And if you actually skip on down to the last bullet, this goes with the first. It talks about our body. Well, to get oxygen gas into our bloodstream through the use of diffusion, remember, going from a high concentration to a low concentration. So within our lungs, that oxygen gas, remember, it's a molecule. It's two oxygens stuck together when they're in a gas form. They like to stay together. So that oxygen molecule, if the blood itself is at a 7.3, which is a pretty neutral level of acid or base, it's just in that pH scale, it's pretty neutral because our blood actually contains a lot of water, and water should be neutral. Whoops, let me go back to that. And if the blood is at a 7.3, it actually is able, the red blood cells are able to carry the oxygen better. So therefore you'll go through cellular respiration easier because you have more oxygen with your glucose to go inside your mitochondria and go through cellular respiration. Remember? Turning food into energy. So you would feel much better. And going back to the second bullet, pH is important because we need to prevent acid rain. Now, acid rain, a lot of you think of as if it hit your skin, you'd know it was acidic, but you don't. It's not that strong where you notice it. But it can affect like buildings or statues and break them down if they're made out of limestone because of a chemical reaction that occurs. Also, it can change the oxygen levels within a lake or a pond. So that can affect the wildlife that depend on that oxygen in the water. Also, safety. pH is very important because if you mix a strong base and a strong acid, you have a dangerous situation. So someone working in an industry where they're having to mix chemicals, even just cleaning chemicals, you can have a very dangerous situation either with an explosion, an exothermic or hot reaction, or with gases being produced. I keep clicking the wrong thing. Last thing, stomach acid. That's going to help break down our food so that the particles are small enough to get into our bloodstream. Okay? Through diffusion, by the way, again. Okay, so it's very important that you understand that we have certain quick ways to see if something is an acid or a base, and they're called indicators. And if you remember, when we were working with yeast, and we wanted to know if they were going through cellular respiration. We actually used BTB, a blue chemical. It was actually the color of blue on this page, the screen that you see, and it turned yellow. Can you remember why it turned yellow? The presence of, that's right, carbon dioxide. But in this case, for this, what we're going to be studying right now, we're going to look at the indicators that tell us if something is an acid or a base. The three that you need to know about are pH paper, litmus paper, and phenolphthalein, which is a chemical. And I'll show you each one of these in the next few slides. Okay? Remember, the most common method of trying to figure out if something is an acid or a base is using an indicator. Okay? And indicators actually change color if they're an acid or a base. All right, so let's first talk about pH paper. pH paper looks just like what you're seeing here on the screen. It'll come in a bottle usually with these little colors on it. Now, if you're colorblind, it can be tricky if you don't see certain colors as you normally would, but even then you can see that the shades match up. And pH paper, if you look down here, I'll give you some examples. Red would be only 2, while a green blue would be a 12. And we're going to talk about what those mean. Okay? So we're talking about pH paper. Now let's talk about, look at this in more, a little bit more detail. So with pH paper, you can dip it, and it would actually sometimes, if you are testing water, especially like pool water, a swimming pool, you would have a pH kit because you want to be sure that water is at a safe level for people to, swim. And when we swim, things get on our mouth and things like that. All right, this is another kind. It's called blue litmus paper. And as you can see, the screen tells us that blue litmus paper turns red when dipped into acid. Red litmus paper turns blue when dipped into a base. Now, the lab we do tomorrow will show you all these substances and you'll have the time to practice. Red litmus paper, though, see here, it has a drop of base, so it turned this blue color, kind of purplish blue. And this blue paper turned red color when an acid was dropped on it. But you can see how these two, if they were sitting at your table, you might get confused on which one is which after you've used them. So if you're comparing the pH paper and litmus paper, pH paper is probably easier to use. Let's keep talking about litmus paper. So in this case, we are dipping the blue paper into the liquid, and it's telling us, remember, it's turning red. So if it's turning red, it's blue turning red, it's an acid. This is red turning blue. Red turning blue, it's base. It's a basic liquid. So now let's go back to pH paper. pH paper, you see a color, it matches up, it tells you where it is. Versus this litmus paper that it just gets confusing. It's a great thing to use if you don't have another choice, but if I had a choice, I'd use pH paper, and we will use pH paper in our lab. All right, phenolphthalein is the third one you need to be familiar with, and it might be mentioned on past testing, and it's one in high school that you might use. And a lot of little, when you see chemistry demonstrations, they might use this as an indicator. It turns colorless when it is acidic. If the solution is an acid, it will be clear, like water. But if it's pink, it's basic. It's a base, and that usually, that tells you what you're dealing with. Okay. Now, I do want to remind you that you actually have different acidic levels in nature. So the hydrangea, you can actually change the color of the flower based on how you make the soil either more acidic or more basic. My grandmother used to put her old coffee grounds around the base of the hydrangea plants to change the color of their flowers. This is a fun one. You can actually make your own pH paper test strips. It's an example of a project that doesn't require a lot of special equipment, as I say here. You're going to chop back red cabbage, has to be red cabbage. You're going to put it, steep it like in like tea. You're going to boil it in a small amount of boiling water. So it's mostly cabbage, not much water. And you're going to then you're going to have this, take the cabbage out, and you'll have this juice, and you can actually make pH paper from it. Okay. Now litmus can actually be found in different kinds of lichens. Those are on trees sometimes. So it's actually came from nature. The pH scale itself is, this is kind of an old copy, but it's simplistic, and I think it's very useful. Neutral is 7. The pH level 0 up to 7 is acid, and everything after 7 is basic. The further away you get from 7, either direction, the stronger it is. So pH is a scale that measures the strengths of acids and bases. Okay, the pH scale goes from 0 to 14, as I said. The lower of the pH, the more acidic it is. The higher the number, the more basic it is. Okay? Pure water, is, as I said earlier, should be a 7 or very close to it. Bases, they actually are substances that have hydroxide ions, or OH negative, that might be seen on past testing. I'll explain that further in our lab. The more OH negative, the stronger the base. So this is one of those moments where if you don't understand that, don't worry. I'm just trying to make you familiar with it. This is important. Bases taste bitter and feel slippery. Okay, so like soap, and almost all soaps are basic. Okay, and anything that has a pH greater than 7 is a base. So baking soda and acids, things like that. All right, so acids are substances that have hydrogen ions, or H positive, and the more H positive, the stronger the acid. Acids taste sour. Any substance with a pH less than 7 is considered to be an acid, like lemon juice, orange juice, vinegar, soda. So let's go back to the scale and just review really quickly. I think it's very common for kids to get these mixed up, and because they know that y'all have misconceptions, they're likely to ask questions about it. And I want you to notice, in English, when we read in English or write in English, we start and we go from the left to the right. And so therefore, if this were a sentence, if you look at it and think about alphabetical order, the first part, 0 up to 7, is acidic. That starts with an A. And then from 7 to 14 is basic. It starts with a B. So this is A for acid, B for base. So that's very important you understand that and don't get mixed up, because you think, oh, if something's really acidic, it's going to have this high number. That's not right. It actually, the more acidic it is, the lower the number. So don't get mixed up. Okay, so let's just wind this up. Let's take a look at our acid-base review. Remember those questions I asked you? Let's take a moment and try to answer them and see how you did. Okay? So, think to yourself or jot it down. Does acid taste sour or bitter? Does base taste sour or bitter? What's the pH range of acids? So what numbers? From what to what is an acid? Fourth question, what are the numbers or range of things that are basic? What's an example of a neutral substance? And why is pH important? That last question, remember we had several things written down. So take your time. You can always pause this, and then in just a moment, I'm going to show you the answers. So if you don't want to see the answers yet, pause now. All right, so here are your answers. Acids taste sour, bases taste bitter, pH ranges from 0 to 7. However, remember 7 is neutral, and then 7 or above 7 to 14 is a base. Our example of a neutral substance is water. And why is pH important? Remember, These are the list of things that we looked at of why pH is important, but you'll discover more as we go into this. So I hope this helped you prepare for your lab tomorrow, and make a comment on Edmodo and let me know what you thought of this. Do you like me pre-recording and flipping a class so that you can preview a material? Let me know. I want your honest opinion. Have a good night.